Alright, welcome back again, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Today I thought I would just go over my Saturn imports today. Yes, another Sega Saturn video. I've been playing a lot Sega Saturn this week, capturing footage and reliving past memories. And I still haven't talked about my imports. And again, just like my US collection, I was clear with my US collection too. It means a lot to me, but it's not very big. Other people have way bigger collections. I know that. I'm cool with that. I'm happy with what I got. But there's definitely some Saturn imports that have a lot of sentimental value for me, for sure. And just like my Sega Saturn US collection, I've owned a lot of imports in the past, and I don't have all of them right now. Meaning I have gotten rid of some over the years in, natural expanding and contracting of collections. So let's chat about a few of them today, capture some footage, have some fun, have some conversations. Let me know down below. And I am announcing on the channel that I am doing reviews starting pretty soon. I literally want to review every single ever released US Sega Saturn game, maybe some Japanese ones too, on the channel. So that is an ongoing project that I am going to jump into when I have time. But enough talk, let's get to the games. So the first couple games I have are actually not imports, but they were US games that I forgot to include in my video because they were with my imports. So no glare here. So obviously I have, some of the single disc ones that everyone has. So Virtual Cop, and I've talked about Virtual Cop before because I do have two in the long box also. So I did talk about the series as a whole, just briefly during that video. Nights into Dreams I haven't really talked about yet, but obviously I have Nights. Like I did have some people wondering I didn't have Nights, but of course I have Nights. I just don't have the big box anymore. I have the 3D controller. I have a Japanese 3D controller, the sort of rare one, the white one. It's going to be one of the first ones I review for the channel because I like it so much and I don't have another avenue to really talk about it. But I have talked about this one before in my underrated Saturn games video. This was one of my top picks, Christmas Nights into Dreams. Obviously this is a fake case that I printed out way back in the day. And it was literally one of the coolest things I'd ever played in my life. There's time-based features in it because the Saturn could use the internal clock to do time. So there's, a year's worth of holidays in the game. It's not just Christmas holidays. There's other holidays too. And it is an amazing love letter to Nights. An amazing love letter from Sega. I've gushed about this in my other video, so I would suggest watching the other video. I'll link to it below if you haven't seen it. And then that actually brings us to imports. And what I have in my hand right now is the first Sega Saturn import I've ever purchased. And obviously, back in the day when the Saturn came out, the internet wasn't a thing. So the way I got my imports mainly, other than you could mail order some from magazines. There were some ads in magazines like Funko Land and stuff. Those big one-page ads at the back of magazines sometimes would list a couple imports, but not like a lot of them. But luckily, my local EB Games at the mall in Daytona Beach, Florida. And anyways, there was an EB Games there, and a lot of the people at the EB Games would actually had connections with people in Japan, so they'd import games, they'd play them, and then they'd actually put them out on the shelf to sell to customers. I don't know how that worked behind the scenes. I don't know if it was shady or whatever was going on. But they were my main avenue. Like whenever a good Saturn import came in, they knew I was the Saturn guy. They would be like, hey, we got this in. It's on the shelf. You want me to hold it for you? Or you want to pass on it? And so, when I had money, which is not very often back then, I would go there and maybe get an import instead of a US game. And so the first one that I picked up while it was there is Vampire Savior. And I actually got this and X-Men vs. Street Fighter around the same time. I got this because obviously it came with the 4 meg RAM cartridge, right? I'm a huge fan of the Night Warriors Vampire Savior series, and the Capcom fighting games on the import Saturn, those were my jam back in the day. That 4 meg cart, it bumped up the graphics and made it look way like these were definitely superior versions if you compared the Saturn and the PlayStation one, the import Saturn with the RAM card, with the PlayStation ones, it was like night and day. It was the one sort of gotcha that the Saturn had for a little while, is the 2D games looked and performed way better on the Saturn. You could actually, switch characters in some of the games, where in the PlayStation you either couldn't switch characters or there was like 5 seconds in load times in between switching characters. And Vampire Savior was easily one of the pinnacles of Capcom fighting, classic fighting goodness on the Saturn. The animations are so good, and I was a huge fan of Felicia back in the day. Got a soft spot in my heart. Another, early gaming crush, if you will. Cat girl Felicia. But literally every single character in the Vampire Savior Night Warriors series is so creative. They're all based on old, monsters, like the Universal monsters, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, and stuff like that. Vampires, obviously. But there's so much personality in the animation and the sprites and everything. It was definitely my favorite one, even more than... I love, obviously, superheroes. So X-Men vs. Street Fighter was a close second in there. And then, I liked it more than Street Fighter. I did play the import of, Street Fighter 03. That was, the greatest Street Fighter when it came out. But I definitely love the personality of the Night Warriors Vampire Savior series a little bit more. And, again, it opened up a gateway. This was my first real Capcom import Saturn fighting game that I bought. I had the 4 meg RAM card. I was ready to go. I had to do a swap trick back then. So I had to do the swap trick method by putting something in and pulling the card out and putting the card back in. It was a mess, but it was so much fun, and I loved it. And eventually I did get the one before that one. So that one's the newer one. That one's the best one. It's got most of the characters and stuff. This is the first one. This was also released in the US, branded Night Warriors. So Darkstalkers is the whole series. This was Night Warriors in the US. This one doesn't use the 4 meg RAM cartridge, but I definitely love that one too. And I got it because you'll notice a common theme with some of these games is the US versions, even, relatively after they came out, the price started to go up just because they were so rare. What a lot of Saturn collectors do is for those exponentially rare US titles, they'll get the import instead. So that's what I did for a few of these titles, and that was one of them. Just because I loved the series so much, I wanted to get sort of both parts. And speaking of importing a game that's a lot cheaper in Japan and the US, that's why I have this. This is House of the Dead on the Sega Saturn. And when I got this, the US version was it was insanely expensive. And I really wanted to own a House of Dead on the Sega Saturn, so I imported it. So there it is. The House of the Dead on the Sega Saturn is definitely not the greatest port in the world. It's not really arcade perfect, but it's definitely fun. It definitely tries to do its House of the Dead thing. It was definitely one of my favorite gun games of all time, especially in the arcade. But I loved, obviously, the horror aesthetic of everything. I love how there's branching paths in there, depending on if you shoot certain things in the area or save certain civilians, then your path branches off, so you can, go through the levels a little bit different every time. It's not the same thing every time. Capturing the footage right here, I don't have a stunner. I'm not using a stunner hooked up to, my recording equipment. So I am using the controller on this, which is not the best way to play. Makes it a little bit harder, but it is what it is. So House of the Dead is definitely fun, but it's definitely not the greatest port in the world, so don't get your hopes up. The next game, the next two games actually, were actually games that I played on the PlayStation first. I loved them, and then I just wanted to have a Saturn version. That's what I did. So the first one is Vandal Hearts. Now, Vandal Hearts is an amazing strategy game. It's Final Fantasy Tactics and then Vandal Hearts right after it on the PlayStation area in the 32-bit era. Obviously now there's so many strategy games. There's like 20 million Disgaias. But Vandal Hearts was super unique. I loved the graphic style. I loved the sounds, the music, the characters. The storyline was pretty good too. And like I said, I definitely wanted to have a Saturn version. The footage I'm capturing now is actually in English patched. Japanese version, because Vandal Hearts on the Saturn actually never came out in the US. It's Japan only. But some amazing fans have translated it, so that's what I'm capturing footage with today. So yeah, if you like strategy games and you have a chance to download it, Vandal Hearts is easily top 2, 3 32-bit era strategy games, right after Final Fantasy Tactics in my mind. I love the giant blood splatter when you kill people. And I even loved how there's a lot of hidden items in the field. There's hidden items and there's chests and stuff like that you can get, which, you know, made it stood out just a, you know, it's just a little bit different. I don't think the Saturn version is much different than the PlayStation one, so there's no advantages to getting the Saturn over the PlayStation, but the next game, the Saturn version, actually does look a little bit better graphically. I wouldn't say that it stands out quite a lot, but it's definitely another one of those amazing RPGs that I loved back in the day, Grandia. I actually have the new, the limited run Switch versions with Grandia 1 and 2 on it that I am actually playing through right now this year. But just like Vandal Hearts, Grandia didn't come out in the US on the Saturn. And the Saturn version supposedly has a little bit more details. It's got more frames of animation, so it definitely looks a little bit better. And again, just like Vandal Hearts though, for this footage, there is a fan translation patch that you can play on a Sadiator or something like that I'm going to be using for this captured footage today. And Grandia, no matter what you play it on, is an amazing game. It's probably, I think I've said this before in a video, I don't remember which video, but it's maybe the PlayStation video. I made a PlayStation video. But it's got one of the best battle systems for any RPG of all time. It's probably my favorite of all time. They perfected it in Grandia 2. In my opinion, Grandia 2 is a little better than 1, battle system-wise. But the battle system is so good, so good. There's a little timeline at the bottom, and the enemies are on the timeline too. And if the enemy's doing an attack, you can actually hit them out of their attack. So if you're strategic and you really plan, you know, what everyone's doing, you can make it so the enemy like doesn't do its like powerful attacks and stuff if you have good timing and you know you anticipate what's going to happen. The little timeline at the bottom. Oh man, I loved the battle system. It was super unique at the time. A lot of the RPG battle systems at the time were just, you know, press the button, wait, press the button and wait. And again, it added a lot of strategy to that formula, and it's easily one of my favorite battle systems of all time. I love it, love it, love it. The next game, I don't even know why I have this, to be honest with you. It's Clockwork Night. It's not hard to get in the US or anything. I just have it. So you know, some games in your collection, you'll see if you're a newer collector or something like that, you just pick them up little by little, and you have no attachment to them. You have no nothing. So Clockwork Night, I don't know, it's okay. You know, it's a side-scrolling platformer. It's got some pretty creative graphics. It was an early Saturn game, so the graphics are not great if you look at it in sort of a vacuum, but for the time they were definitely good. It's, you know, got the 2.5D going on, the rotoscoped characters and stuff like that, but it was pretty creative. Obviously, you know, it's a little like Toy Story, probably inspired by Toy Story a little bit. Is Toy Story out when that came out? I don't know, scratch that. But I don't know, it's okay. It's a cheap Saturn game. If you like platformers, it's probably worth playing. You know, it's right up there with Bug, I guess. Alright, we're getting down to some good ones now. The next game fits into that category of the US one being way too much money for me. And so I had to pick up an import of Biohazard. Yes, Resident Evil 1 Biohazard. Resident Evil in Japan, it's called Biohazard. So I have a specific nostalgia for this first one, which I went over in my PlayStation video. If you haven't watched my PlayStation video, please watch it. But Resident Evil 1 was actually my first PlayStation 1 game I ever owned. When I got the system, I got, you know, a sort of shady system. Watch the video. I went through the story of how I got the system. It was kind of shady. And Resident Evil 1 was the first game I ever bought. Long box game, EB Games, at the mall. And so that was my first introduction to survival horror. And so me being the Saturn fan, obviously I wanted the Saturn version too. And I know there's definitely some differences, meaning that the Saturn version is not superior than the PlayStation version. What I hear and what I've been able to tell is some of the pre-rendered backgrounds are actually look better on the Saturn, but the 3D polygons definitely look better on the PlayStation. So it's a give or take. But one cool thing about the Japanese version of Biohazard is it's got some extra stuff in it that PlayStation doesn't. It has some uncensored scenes in it, whereas the PlayStation had censored scenes, which they did fix that eventually. They released a director's cut on the PlayStation 1 with those scenes added back in. But the Japanese Biohazard for the Saturn has those scenes in it. It also has a new play mode. It's like a sort of mercenaries mode or a battle mode. I've never played it, but I definitely had to have the game on the Saturn. I love the first Resident Evil, like I said. Super nostalgic for me. It's obviously not the best in the series. 2 is probably the best in the series, in my opinion. Again, watch that PlayStation video and I'll go through that. But I had to have the Saturn version. And I'll definitely get a US one, hopefully, someday. But I have that for now. Next up is one of those imports that EB Games had for me, because they knew, my friends at EB Games knew that my favorite gaming company in the whole world, and it's been this way for a long time, I think they do no wrong. They're amazing, they're creative, they're just awe-inspiring. They make the most original, creative, fun, challenging, unique games out of anyone out there. Still to this date, and it's Treasure. Treasure is my favorite game company of all time. I might do a Treasure video at some point because I do have most of their games, but the first Saturn game I got from Treasure is Silhouette Mirage. And now Silhouette Mirage is a really, really quirky one. It's a really weird one, and it's honestly not one of their best ones, but it's definitely worth playing. It's super cool, and to me, it could be a precursor for Ikaruga, which is one of their shooters, which I believe is the best shooter of all time. It's not my favorite. My favorite's coming up in a minute. But the Ikaruga with the reverse polarity, like some things were like, dark and some things were like light, and you can, change your form to battle the different things. Well, this game had that in it. It had Mirage and Silhouettes. And depending on which way you were facing, red or sort of purplish, you would do damage to the opposite color. So we would constantly... So the game is kind of quirky. It is kind of weird, because as you walk to the side, it's a side-scrolling platformer. There's a lot of different weapons and stuff. It's not just, jumping on the bad guys' heads. You get different weapons to fit your style of gameplay. Obviously, some weapons are better than the others, but all the enemies are either one of the two types. And so as you're walking to the right, if you're red and there's red enemies, then it's very awkward, because if you're walking to the right and you're red and you have red enemies beside you, you can't actually hurt them. So you actually have to it's a little awkward, that's what I'm trying to describe here. So you either have to go around them and shoot from the other direction where your purple side is to damage them, or there is a button to switch sides, switch your polarity. So if there's a lot of red enemies coming from the right, you could switch your polarity to be Silhouette, so you can damage those enemies as you're going forward. But it leads to a little bit of awkwardness, a little bit of clunkiness, and so that's why I say it's not one of Treasure's best. However, saying that, the graphics in the game and the quirky storyline and the dialogue and the characters and everything are like 10 out of 10. Treasure. They're treasure. So it is a super fun game, even though it's a little bit quirky. And again, this is the Japanese version, but there's a fan translation, again, that I will be capturing for this footage. So you will see English dialogue. And it's definitely worth playing. It did come out on the PlayStation also. So it's not Saturn exclusive, but the Saturn 2D powerhouse, can't go wrong with that. The next game is Virtual On, and I never had the twin sticks for this. This game is sort of night and day between playing with the controller and playing with the actual twin stick controllers, which I'll show. So Virtual On is sort of like an arena fighter. It's like a mech arena fighter. But again, the arcade version had these two twin sticks, which you would control the mech with. And that's what the game is designed for. It's a little awkward on a controller. You can't quite aim and do the things you want to do. Whereas, you know, the control sticks actually made it sort of feel like you were actually controlling a mech in the cockpit or something like that. It's not quite Steel Battalion level, but it was very cool and immersive experience when you had the twin stick. But it's definitely a pretty good game. Like, there's a bunch of different fighters. They each have different moves. They only have 3 moves, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. 3 moves each, but they're all definitely different. So there's definitely, someone in there that you'll experiment with that you'll like. And this game did come out in the US, but I did get the Japanese version, so I had no use for the US one. There's no language barrier or anything with it, so that's why I never bought the US version. But it's definitely one of those cooler Sega first-party titles that's really unique. And the last game in my import pile is my favorite. It's got the most sentimental value to me, the most nostalgic value to me, because I did get very lucky. I did get it at EB Games again. I got the call, hey, I know you want this. Hey, I sped there and got it. And I had a lot of friends back then that liked import Saturn stuff too, but they didn't have a Saturn, so I was sort of the main, person that collected the stuff too. And they were so jealous that I had this game, because relatively soon after this game came out, it shot up in value, and it's always been a super expensive title. I don't know what it's worth now. I don't care about that. I don't follow it. But this is one of those games that's priceless to me. It's my favorite shooter of all time. If you know what it is, you know what it is. I'm burying the lead here a little bit, but it's my favorite shooter of all time. Now, I already said I think Ikaruga is the best shooter of all time. Definitely. Period. End of story. Ikaruga is the best shooter of all time. However, this is my favorite. This is my favorite shooter of all time. And that is, obviously, Radiant Silvergun. Again, Treasure's my favorite company of all time. This is the best shooter of all time. I've had the super premium blah 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 edition from Limited Run Games pre-ordered for, I don't know, like a year. And, typical Limited Run Games, it's going to come out whenever. But I do think it's probably hitting soon, because I have seen people that have it. But man, oh my gosh, this is how you do a shooter. It's got so much style and so much substance. It's got a story. It's got anime cinemas. It's got, talking as you're actually playing. Like 99.9% of shooters have zero story. And that's okay for the shooter genre, to be quite honest. But there's like a 5-minute cinema at the beginning of this game. Like, there's this full weird story that I don't understand because it's in Japanese. And there might be a translated ROM patch out of this. I don't know if I have it. But I mean, let me tell you the ways I love this game. The first thing about this game to love is the soundtrack is one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time. Again, for a shooter, like, the music is unreal. I actually have the Data Disc Vinyl soundtrack from the game, which I'm probably going to do a video eventually about my vinyl video game soundtracks that I have, because I do love to collect vinyls, and I obviously love video games, so it seems like a natural fit. But just like my last video, when I mentioned Final Fantasy VII, like how the music really heightened every sort of aspect of it, the music just heightens this game to, again, another level. I know I say that a lot. It's cliche, but it's true. And Radiant Silvergun was actually an arcade game, obviously, before a Saturn game, so the Saturn was obviously a port of it. But they did something genius when they made this version. There's actually a Saturn mode in it, and the way they have it set up, which is why it works so well. Like, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Whoever designed this is brilliant. I love you. But you basically have 3 weapons, A, B, C. But then you can also combine the weapons. Like, you can combine A and B, and you can combine, you know, A and C together to create a new weapon. But the key thing for the Saturn mode is it's almost like a roguelike sort of thing, meaning you'll start to play it and you won't get very far. Your guns aren't very strong, and you know, your ship's kind of slow and dopey. But as you play, as you kill things, your weapons level up. And the cool thing is you could actually save your weapon levels after you die. So what you do is you'll probably go in and die on, like, you know, 2nd level or a boss or something like that. And then you'll start again, and when you start again, your weapons will be a little higher. So now you can get a little bit farther. You'll die again, start again, but now your weapons are level 5 each. So now you'll blow through the first couple levels and, you know, maybe get a little farther than you did last time. And at the time, obviously that's commonplace nowadays with all the roguelikes and roguelites and stuff like that. But at the time, for a shooter, I never played anything like that. And shooters I love. I've always loved shooters, but I've never been that good at them. And so this sort of makes it definitely manageable, right? Because you do make progress every time you sort of start over. It's not purely skill-based. You can, you know, overpower the enemy. Like all treasure games, it's got brilliant boss design. Absolutely brilliant. A lot of the bosses use the environment too. So again, it's super unique. Like, not a lot of shooters, even to this date, do stuff like that. But there's some bosses where you have to, like, hide behind pillars to avoid, you know, the giant laser blasts and stuff like that. And Treasure is obviously known for the bosses, so, you know, the bosses are where, you know, this game shines for sure. I'm telling you, Radiant Silvergun is such an amazing game. I know I think it's a digital download nowadays on a few different systems, so you can readily get it nowadays, so I would definitely play it in some of those digital avenues rather than trying to find the Saturn version, because I'm sure, like I said, I don't know. I'm sure the Saturn disc is probably super expensive because it never came to America again, but it's not stuck on the Saturn because there is digital versions available, and there's obviously the physical one coming from Limited Run Games in 89 or something like that. And I just adore the game. It's my favorite shooter of all time. Like I said, I wouldn't sell it for the world. For $1 million. Well, okay, $1 million, I would sell it to you. If you offer me $1 million for it, I would have to say yes. But for $1 less, no, never. Alright, so that's my Saturn imports, everybody. So hope this is a bookend to my Saturn, US Saturn collection video that got a lot of good comments, a lot of good views, a lot of people talking, and that's all I want from my videos. That's all I ask is, let's chat with each other down at the bottom and have some fun and reminisce about the good old 32-bit days. There's definitely a lot more imports that I've owned over the years. A lot of the Capcom fighters I've owned over the years. The Panzer Dragoon games, I had Japanese versions at one time. I thought I still had them, but I can't find them. So a lot of my games are still in boxes right now because I moved recently, so I don't know. Maybe I have them, maybe I don't. But thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. Peace out, guys, gals, non-binary pals. You're welcome here too.